Hello there, team training people. Today is Tuesday, August the 3rd, almost 2 o'clock Eastern. We will get going here in just a moment or two. If you are seeing this right now, I would love to have you jump on to the Zoom call so you can interact with me and I can kind of personalize this thing a little bit more for the exact people that would really take a ton of value away from this. I actually condensed the number of slides that are in this presentation to allow a lot of room for just, again, the personalization of it. So if you could jump on, join Brian and I. Brian's here as always with me on Tuesday. How you doing today, man? Oh, you're still muted.
I am doing well. How are you, Josh?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I was like, I thought I fixed my headphones, but maybe I didn't.
I double clicked it.
That's all right, man. So you're doing good?
Yeah, doing well. A little couple unexpected things, so I had to come running in again, but I'm here.
No, that's okay, man. That's okay. I know Taylor is probably not going to be joining us today. She messaged me earlier this morning saying she's feeling a bit under the weather. So prayers that she gets better soon, because I know the people like to see and hear from Taylor as well. So Taylor, we are hoping that you get better very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. Brian, I don't know if you heard me during kind of the introduction as I was inviting people to come join us. I did create slides, but I scaled back the number of slides so that I could make this, a little bit more interactive, do some, back and forth, help you guys out, whether it's just you or if it's anybody else. And since Taylor is not going to be with us today, I'll kind of be bringing up my YouTube screen as well, just to see if anybody has any comments for us.
Okay, cool.
All right, so let's rock and roll, man. So what we're going to talk about today is how to coach movement better. And I thought that it would be a good opportunity to kind of start by me telling you a little bit of a story. So I have been a health and fitness coach for going on like 20 years now. And amidst all of that, I found CrossFit probably, I think my wife and I agreed that it was sometime back in like 2007 or 2008. We can't agree on the date, but we're sure that it's been, a pretty long time that I have been very familiar and involved in the CrossFit space. And the unique thing about my journey into CrossFit was there was nothing that they were doing within that methodology that was new to me. Meaning, if you just look at it very objectively from the standpoint of they're doing some weightlifting, whether it's Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting, I had a lot of exposure to that, which is, I think, different from a lot of folks. So I had exposure to weightlifting, in particular Olympic weightlifting. So I kind of had that going for me. I had done gymnastics a bit as a kid growing up, and then just calisthenics in general, and being an athlete for, a portion of my life, very loosely termed athlete, by the way. Being that I had done that, the gymnastics part was not new to me. And then the conditioning and running and sprinting and doing all that kind of stuff, none of that was really new to me. But what was new was a couple of ways that they put things together. But the only movement that I had never had exposure to that's kind of in the common lexicon of CrossFit was the muscle up. I had remembered seeing it vaguely, like in gymnastics in the Olympics, but I knew enough to know that it was just something that gymnasts did to kind of get up onto the rings. But in CrossFit, in the sport, it was like you do this thing and that counts as a repetition of the reps that you're doing, right? Or the movement that you're doing. So when I first stumbled into a CrossFit gym, the only thing that I wanted to learn was how to do that. So I approached my coach, or the guy who was coaching at the time, and I said, "Hey, I'm pretty competent in all this stuff." And of course, he ran me through a very robust assessment. I probably had the strength back then to do 20 or 25 strict pull-ups, so it wasn't that. I could do, body weight dips or weighted dips for days. It wasn't an issue of that. And I could actually fumble my way up onto the rings, give it enough time to just mess around. So he watched me do that, and then he brought me down. And he said, "Okay, so what is the actual goal?" So we talked about that, being able to last deep into workouts, being able to deal with all the volume. And he said, "Okay, so then we're going to go all the way back to the basics. and I'm going to teach you this thing called the false grip. And you can't move on from a static false grip. You can't move to the next step until you can hold that for 30 seconds unbroken. And then it was, can you do a kip swing with the false grip for 30 seconds? And so you can kind of see this progression. But to me, that was one of the first times that I had really saw the inner workings of somebody who is not just coaching somebody to do the thing, check the box, and then move on. It was a better way to coach movement, and it has made all the difference in things and decisions that I have put together. So that to me kind of speaks to the power of being able to coach really, really well. And that's what we want to cover today. Not specifically about the muscle up, but just about coaching movement better. So why is this a really important topic to cover? Well, number one, I think we're all fascinated by movement, being in the health and fitness field. And it's a place where you can make real-time adjustments and give clients success. I mean, right there on the spot. And this is rare because if you give somebody, a prescription to sleep better, they might not notice success in that area for days, weeks, months, or years. Same thing with nutrition. Nutritional changes that you give to somebody, they might not manifest in being successful in the client's mind for days, weeks, and months after. And then the same thing with stress management. Although the argument could certainly be made that, if you can get people to kind of be a little bit more present in the moment, that they will have some success right there. But in particular, I think movement is the one where we can just have a huge tangible effect. The second reason why I think this is super important for us is because it's really what clients most associate with being in the gym. They don't come into the gym, at least most that I know, they don't come into the gym to sleep. They don't come in to be coached on how to cut their vegetables up or meal prep. And they're probably not there on learning how to manage their stress more proactively. They're there to move. So it's really important that we are great movement coaches in that regard. I also think that it's important to talk about coaching movement better because there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace as to the level of competence that you need as a coach to coach movement really well. And as a side note, kind of spoiler alert, you do not need a PhD in biomechanics. You don't need to understand optimal joint angles, anthropometrics, body limb lengths, or any of that stuff to coach movement really well. And then, one of the last points that I'll make is there is an element of safety, effectiveness, and efficiency in teaching somebody to move better. So we might as well be more competent as coaches on how we can coach movement better. And then the last point that I'll make is, when I talk to coaches about coaching movement better, the conversation inevitably turns to, well, what cues should I be providing to correct movement? And I think that is like step number 10. And a lot of coaches would do well to start at step number 1. It's almost as if we're trying to start school in the 8th grade, but we don't have the ability to read quite yet. And that's not a knock on anybody. It's just that I want to provide a framework that says, before we get into movement cues and corrections, let's do a little bit of homework on the front end. All right. So that I'm a big fan of the Cliff's Notes version of my presentation. So it's 3 words today, very short and sweet. It is assess, design, and refine. Assess, design, and refine is the Cliff's Notes. All right. Okay, so first thing that we need to do is just a quick review of the basics. I think that it is super important that we as coaches have just a very basic level of understanding of fundamental movement patterns, because it allows us the opportunity to see movement in a much different way. Okay. And we went over this way back towards the beginning of June in another team training presentation. So I'm not going to go into detail. You just need to know that there's 5: the squat, the hinge, the push, pull, and then core movements. And the great thing about this is that once you understand what those movements are and you understand what the gym equivalents are, you can look for the patterns not just in the gym, but out of the gym. And that's really cool because it allows for you to maintain much more relatability with your clients. So instead of talking about deadlifting outside of the gym, you can talk to people about, hey, you know how everyone tries to pick up all of the groceries at one time and carry them into the house? Well, guess what? That's actually a combination of a core movement and a hinging movement. All right. When you are bending over repeatedly, when you are doing some gardening work, that is akin to a hinging movement as well. And when your child asks you to toss them in the pool, that is a pushing movement. So it allows you this unique lens to see movement outside of the gym, because that is ultimately what's going to make you the most relatable and thus the most trustworthy to your clients. All right. And so this was just a screenshot of that, the first slide in that team training from 6-8. It was literally called Fundamental Movement Patterns. We talked about using a balanced exercise selection to keep your clients safe and returning for years. So if that's something that you're interested in rewatching, let me know and I can get you that link. But again, I didn't want to dwell on this for too long, because if you've been with us long enough, you've seen that, and I don't want to pound that into your head too much. So that was the first thing, is just reviewing and understanding the basics. So the second thing that we've got to do in order to coach movement better is assess our clients. So the way that we look at this is that assessing is really like this holistic approach. And it's really a combination between what is said between you and the client. So the conversation, what we call the initial client consultation, you sit down with them for 60, 75, maybe even 90 minutes in some cases, and you learn all about them. So we're listening to them, we're empathizing, we're asking questions, we're reflecting, and then we're giving them next steps, right? So that's learn. So that's what is said between you and the client. And then the other side of that addition equation is what is seen. And that is specifically the movement assessment. So when we say take a holistic approach, what we're talking about is that what is said and what is seen. So the consultation plus everything that you're doing in the movement assessment. The reason why it's really important to have this holistic approach is because they might show you one thing as they're moving, but if it is in conflict with things that they are saying, that needs to be addressed. So all of these things should both inform and influence what it is you are actually going to do with your client down the road. So the way that we look at assessment from a movement perspective, when we're talking about what is seen, is I like to think of it in the unfamiliar patterns and the familiar patterns. The unfamiliar patterns, what I mean here is something like the functional movement screen. So that's what we use at Two Brain Coaching. That's what we use at my own gym. That is part one of assessing movement. And there are certainly pros and cons. I've seen great arguments for and against the FMS. What I really, really like about it is that there is a common language amongst anybody who is familiar with the FMS. And so no matter if I'm at a gym in Florida or a gym in Australia, if they use the FMS and so do I, we can both talk on a pretty level playing field in terms of what we've seen for the client. So that's really cool from a health and fitness coach perspective. But then it also brings in the element of being able to talk intelligently with a physio or a physical therapist, right? So if you can go and talk to a physio and relate to them what you've seen in your client's FMS, all of a sudden there's a little bit of a leveling out of what you guys are both discussing. The other reason that we like that is the fact that it is unfamiliar, not just to the client, but also to the coach. So why it's important to test some unfamiliar things to clients is it doesn't allow them to hide things. So if a client comes to you that's experienced in fitness and you're just testing an air squat, a thruster, a deadlift, and a kettlebell swing, and they kind of know how to work around showing maybe some deficiencies that they have, that could go unnoticed. All right. But if we put them through a battery of tests like the FMS that they are potentially not familiar with, all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder to hide deficiencies that they have. The other benefit here is for the coach. As coaches, we're used to seeing, especially in Brian's case, the kettlebell swing over and over and over. We're used to seeing deadlifts and squatting and pressing and pulling. And so sometimes we can become a little bit complacent in being really nitpicky when we're going through an assessment, if that's all that we are assessing. So the lack of familiarity in terms of seeing it multiple times for hundreds of repetitions on the daily of something like an FMS makes us pay that little bit of extra attention to what the client's doing. And so the assessment becomes more and more and more robust. So we talk about unfamiliar, but we also need to see familiar patterns. So Brian, in your case, if you are programming, your workouts with kettlebells, you need to see somebody swing a kettlebell, because that is what they are going to be doing when they come into your class or your gym. If you're using barbell-based movements, then your assessment should probably have something that is right there at the most basic level with a barbell, or just removing it and replacing it with something akin to a barbell like a PVC pipe. All right. So you need unfamiliar, but you also need to see the familiar patterns, because that's what you are actually going to be coaching in the gym. And that's really, really important. The last piece in terms of assessing your client is just, you need to see them do some sort of work that's going to get their heart rate up, their sweat coming, things like that. And so what we talk about is the 10-minute test on the assault bike for as many calories as you can do. And I've seen a ton. We've ran through a number of different assessment tests at my gym over the years. And the reason that we decided on this a couple of years ago is that it's super simple. If somebody is 8 years old, if somebody is 18 years old or 80 years old, and you show them, this is a bike, I need you to pedal and move your arms on these handles and see this little screen, and you're going to pedal for 10 minutes until it's over, and this is going to be your score. There isn't a whole lot more of explanation that needs to go into it. I'm also not concerned with safety, because there is a very, very low barrier to entry to putting somebody on a bike. Now, I'll admit that a really great case could be made for, if I don't have a bike, maybe putting them on a rower. Yes, that's a great substitute if you don't have a bike. But the bike is always going to be easier than a rower if you have it, simply because there is more technique that goes into a really efficient rowing stroke than there is just pedaling on the bike. The other benefits here is that it's easily repeatable. So if a client starts out with me in Florida, does a 10-minute bike test, and I measure where their handles and their seat position were at, and then 6 months down the road, they go to Brian's gym and he also tests the 10-minute bike test. Well, guess what? The client can tell him, oh, I was at this seat position. This was my score. It's very easily repeated without anything else being changed. Okay. It's inexpensive, provided that you have a bike, right? And it provides a lot of valuable insight. So not just from how strong is this client? Yes, the bike can actually show you that. How powerful are they? How enduring are they? So we're measuring kind of 3 components of fitness. But then it'll also give you great insights into somebody's strategy. If I've never swung a kettlebell for 10 minutes and Brian tells me I've got to do it for 10 continuous minutes as a part of this test, there's a little bit of strategy that starts taking place into my head. And same thing here on the bike. So that's very, very good information for us as coaches to get, that allows us to actually coach movement better down the road. It also talks or gives insights into pacing, and then simply their reaction to the test of what they are going to do. And then after they have finished it, provides a lot of insight into the type of client that we are dealing with. Okay. The goal here, I put in the slide that the goal is to be Picasso. And what I mean by that, it might end up being a terrible analogy now that I think about Picasso's paintings in my head, but the goal of the assessment is just to paint as clear of a picture as possible of the person who is sitting in front of you. And so saying that out loud, I recognize that probably wasn't the right artist to use for that analogy. And I can see by Brian's reaction that he's probably in agreement there that I could have picked somebody a little bit better. Yeah, Brian?
You're doing great.
All right, cool. Real quick, I'm just going to check, see if there's any. Sandy, yes, I did say the 10-minute assault bike test. I would love to hear if you have any feedback on that. If you want to jump on and talk to us, that her reaction right there, and I'm making some assumptions, but her reaction right there might provide some valuable insight in terms of what I might do to coach movement better for Sandy in the future if she was one of my clients. I'll give her another second to respond because I know that the 10-minute assault bike test can, can have some strong opinions on it. Okay, so we'll come back to that. All right, so we've understood the basics. We've assessed the client. The next thing is this idea that the design, your program design, needs to begin where somebody's ability ends. Okay. So if we go back in time to the assessment and it was abundantly clear that they could not perform a squatting pattern without significant, I don't want to say movement faults, but maybe that's the best thing that I could say. If they could not perform a squatting movement without significant faults being present, I'm not going to load that squat. I'm probably not also going to give them something that is terribly complex from a squatting pattern as well. All right. So the design of what you are going to give to your client begins where their ability ends. And because of that, the nature of how much quote unquote coaching you are going to have to put into their movement is far less than what people actually think should be happening. You see, the challenge arises when we are programming movements that are well beyond the current abilities of our clients. So in our squatting case, if somebody presented with collapsed in knees and inability to keep the torso vertical, shifting our hips to the left, and we program overhead squats just because we've heard that it's a great core movement that elicits a lot of positive neuroendocrine adaptation and use big words, and these things sound fancy, and it's what is programmed on the whiteboard. Yeah, you are going to have a heck of a time, even if you give them a darn PVC pipe, making them move effectively. And yeah, you are going to have to do a ton of correction just for that thing. So make sure that the stress that you are giving them is just enough to drive adaptation. We're not overly stressing them. We're not putting a ton of demand on their central nervous system like we would in the case where we're looking at somebody who really can't air squat very well, and yet just because it's programmed on the whiteboard, we're going to give them an overhead squat. So what we talk about here is minimum effective dose. So maybe it's an air squat where we are giving them a subtle push on one side of their hip so that they course correct on their own to fix their hip shift. All right. Maybe if it's not feasible for you to do that, tactically giving them cues, maybe you rig up a band to the side of your rig and pull them into the more bad position, quote unquote, bad position. So they self-correct a little bit, over-correct into a better position. All right. We're not giving them an overhead squat. We're not overly stimulating them, but we're giving them just enough stress to drive adaptation. All right. The other thing here is the KISS principle. And I don't mean keep it simple or keep it simple, stupid. I can't even say it that way anymore. What I mean is keep it super simple. We assess the air squat. They were not able to do that well. I don't need to introduce complexity or novelty or variety for the sake of just, hey, it's a new thing, squirrel. No, I just need to keep it simple. Fix this one thing with that one movement without introducing new movement. All right, keep it super simple. And then an easy way to do that is something that we detailed back on, actually way back. This was almost 4 months ago, 3.5 months ago, back in April, team training. We went over the whole, like, how to effectively do program design for your clients. And we talked about this thing called the 3 Ps framework, which was prioritize, plan, and progress. So prioritize, what we're talking about specifically here is, what's the low-hanging fruit that you found in the assessment? I noticed that Jeff shifts to his left when he's squatting. Great. That's a great thing to prioritize when it comes to design for your client. Then in terms of the plan, this is where you're going to tell the client how you intend to get them better and align it with why they are there. All right. Because remember, Jeff didn't show up to fix his hip shift to the left problem. Jeff showed up for some other reason. Was it to lose weight? Was it to get out of pain? Was it to play with his kids? Whatever the reason was, instead of, hey, we're just going to fix this, it's, hey, Jeff, remember in the assessment, we discovered you shifting to your left when you squat. So one of the things that we're going to focus on the first 4 weeks of you training with us is bringing that back into balance. Here is how that is going to help us get you closer to your goal of boom. And you insert their goal right there. Okay. And it's really, really, really important that you share the plan with them, tell them what it is. All right. And then connect it. All right. If you're missing any of those elements, you're going to lose out on that client's ability to know, like, and trust you. They need to know that there's a plan, and they need to actually be connected to that plan, which you get when you actually share it with them. And then the last P of that 3 Ps framework is progress. And I found this meme, this Forrest Gump meme, where in the movie, they're actually talking about all the different ways that you can cook shrimp, if I'm remembering correctly. But in this case, there are a ton of possibilities for how you can progress your clients. Okay. One of the ways is different movement. Right? You can go from back squat to front squat to overhead squat to air squat to squat clean, goblet squat, squat snatches. And there are a ton of different ways. You could do split squats. You could do lateral squatting. You could do lunges in place. You could do sideways lunges, step ups, step downs, all those kinds of ways to progress a client by increasing or decreasing the complexity of the movement. So that's one way that we can do it. Some other ways. We could change the number of sets that somebody is doing for a particular movement. That offers them the ability to progress. You could change the number of repetitions. You could change the rest period, right? If you give the client perhaps more rest, would they be able to lift a heavier weight than if you had given them less rest? And what does the rest period say to what should actually be done in that particular set? You could change up the tempo. So if you wanted to work on really gaining a lot of strength, perhaps you have them concentrate on an elongated eccentric tempo, right? These are all ways to progress. And then you could also change up the load, right? Increase the load, decrease the load, whatever it is. But there are an infinite amount of possibilities of how you can progress somebody. And this all ties into how we can coach movement better. So this is a screenshot of the team training from April 20th of this year. And we just talked about some sample training designs. Okay. Part number 4 is the refinement. And I use the term refine instead of correcting movement, not because I think, if we say, oh, you're going to correct the client's movement, it's because they were doing something wrong. Maybe, but the reason that we use refinement versus correcting at Two Brain Coaching is because refinement speaks to we're just looking for these small continual improvements over the long term, right? I don't want to max out to the maximum physical potential somebody's deadlift when they come in month number 3. I just want to know that they did a little bit more than they did the last time. Because if I go to the far reaches of their maximum physical potential, I'm probably never going to get that ability again. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times if they're a novice client. But if you've been in the game long enough, if you're an intermediate or an advanced trainee, you're never going to the well that many more times in your life. Okay. So refinement speaks to, I'm just tweaking things a little bit on my dial. Maybe I'm going 1 or 2 degrees instead of a full 360. Okay. Here's the thing. When it comes to movement refinement, if you just get the program design right, you will minimize the amount of work you spend correcting or refining movement. A lot of correction and refinement can actually be eliminated if you program design based on what we've talked about, where design begins where ability ends. If you skip from air squat that looked like hot garbage to an overhead squat with PVC because that's what's on the whiteboard, you've got a ton of work to do. Versus if you just work on fixing that hip shift and work on only that, ignoring all the other train wreck parts of that air squat until the hip shift gets fixed, you'll find that you don't actually have to refine things as much as you have in the past. So design takes care of so much of the work of actually coaching movement. And I know it's not popular because I know for a lot of coaches, they can think in their head like, oh my gosh, if I'm not giving them cues, what am I going to do? I'm useless as a coach. Well, if all you are is a coach that gives cues, maybe. But I would say that you just need to expand your understanding of how vitally important your role is when you have somebody there with you in person. Okay. And before I go over this checklist, I just want to double check back into the Facebook group to see if anyone responded so far. I didn't see any other comments. So maybe Sandy deleted us right away when we said 10 minutes assault bike test. Okay. Now, everything that we've set up to this point, let's say that you've done it. Let's say that you understand the basics, you've assessed the client, you've written just a really, really great design. But guess what? We do actually have to refine movement. Well, that's great because there is a 3-step checklist to when you should be refining movement. The first one always is movement should be pain-free. When somebody's in the gym with you, they should not be in pain with anything that you are having them do. I don't care if it's a warm-up movement, if you're giving them inchworms, if you're giving them arm swings. If you notice, this is one of the reasons why a lot of the movement or a lot of the warm-ups that I've given over the years are relatively the same when I see clients, is because I can see progression in them or regression. I can read body language, facial expressions. If they normally never show a pain face when swinging their arms overhead and suddenly they do on a Tuesday when they came in to see me, I know that I need to check in on something and potentially modify what we're going to be doing later or work on refining some movement in that case. So the first thing that I'm looking for is I want zero pain whatsoever. So if you see somebody performing a movement that either A, you notice they're showing a pain face, or B, they voiced that they have pain while they're doing the movement, the first thing that you do is go over there. Obviously, you're going to have some conversation, figure out, did something happen? Is this something chronic? Maybe they've done a great job of hiding it recently. Was it acute? Did they trip and fall? And now they're having some shoulder pain. Did they sleep on their shoulder funny last night? Figure out, kind of what's going on. And then you can try a couple of regressions. All right. So what I mean by that is we're taking the CNS demand of the movement right now that's causing pain, and we're trying to lower that. All right. So do 2 or 3 different regressions of movements, and that's on you as the coach to know what those are. But do a couple of those. You only have to try out a couple of reps and find one that offers no pain, not less pain, no pain. That is the goal. If you're still continuing to coach just because they say, oh yeah, it doesn't hurt as bad, don't do that. Okay. If you cannot regress a movement to the point where they have zero pain whatsoever, your duty is to refer them to a professional. Okay. We've got to remember our scope as health and fitness coaches. And now, if you're a physio or a physical therapist, this doesn't apply to you. All right. But for us as health and fitness coaches that are not PTs, stay within scope. Be the professional that refers them to somebody that can actually fix what is going on mechanically. And don't, and I've done this, don't be the one that tries to stretch it out, to mobilize it out. Give me the lacrosse ball, get on the foam roller, take this hypervolt gun, and let's see if we can numb the pain. Or, oh, you know what? I just need to get warm, and then the pain drifts away. No, don't be that coach that does that. If you can't find a movement that allows them to do something pain-free, it's okay. Refer them to a professional. So that's piece number 1 to that 3-step checklist. All right. Number 2, we're looking at posture and position. Posture, what we're talking about here is if somebody is out of alignment from head to toe, and this could be spinal position, right? If you are doing a deadlift and their spine is not in a good neutral position, this is when you would step in and refine that movement. Maybe it's because they're just tired. All right. Maybe it's because they have not established a good default motor pattern to always default to that neutral spine position. That's fine. We find that this is actually the case in a lot of novice trainees. So you may actually have to do some movement refining or some course correction whenever that person is on the floor and you're doing some sort of movement that could potentially put the spine into flexion or extension. All right. So spinal alignment is first, and then positionally, what we're looking at is like more localized refinements. So in a push-up, of course, we're concerned with head to toe alignment. We don't want the hips sagging. We don't want the butt way up in the air. Those are like the major kind of global things that we want to work on refining. After that, it's some of the smaller things. Are your elbows flaring out to 90 degrees, or are they a little bit tighter to the body, maybe at a 45-degree angle? Those would be more positional things. All right. So postural is the big global piece. We want everybody to be in a good neutral spine position. Positional could be, I don't know, Brian, I'm curious. Postural in a kettlebell swing, obviously we don't want them rounding over, but are there some other like little refinements that you might look to, whether it's arms bending or knees bending or anything like that with the kettlebell swing?
Yeah, little subtle things like that, but they're all pretty similar to the deadlift. A lot of it starts to come in to where since it's a ballistic movement and it's happening quicker, you want to make sure that they're controlling that movement throughout the whole swing instead of just parts of it. But yeah, like a good example with the arms is if their arms are bent here, then it changes the direction of the bell from out to up. And so then the bell floats a little easier. They don't have to work their core, or maybe their glutes is hard during that plank. And then it changes to where, like if the bell keeps going forward and they have locked out arms, then they have to use their core and their glutes a lot more. So,
yeah, I'm curious, when you guys are doing some of your like longer duration tests, do you coach it as arms straight or arms bent?
with hard style, we would always say arms as straight as you can be, because not everyone's going to have a full lockout, but yeah, as straight as they can be. And we don't really ever do like 10 minutes straight of swinging. It's usually like in an EMOM format or in intervals, typically I wouldn't do one set of swings longer than a minute. And that would be a pretty far stretch, I would say.
That's funny you mentioned that, man, because yesterday we had a workout in the gym with every round had 30 swings. And I know that takes me about a minute.
Oh man.
Now, it was the 2-round workout, and I know it's like, oh man, how many rounds? There's only 2 rounds, but it's sandwiched in between a whole bunch of other stuff. But it had been a while since I swung a kettlebell, and I normally 30, no problem. Like I could go for a minute, and I just got worked over pretty good. Like my forearms are a little sore today, my traps and everything. So it's a good reminder of like specificity of training too.
Yeah, that's actually a great thing about those longer sets, though, is they show you where a lot of your leaks might be.
Yep. I had a lot. There was some refinement that needs to be done for sure.
Come see me.
Okay, cool. All right. So third step on the checklist is actually shared with the 3 Ps framework that we talked about earlier. And that's just progress. All right. And what you want to think about here is, are they being challenged in new ways over time? And I don't mean that every day they come in, it's something new and different and novel and variety and yay, but it's on a long enough time frame. We talked about periodization, like for athletes a couple weeks ago, and on a long enough time frame, you would think in say 12 months, maybe we go from, to Brian's point, the kettlebell swing being a very ballistic or dynamic movement. Maybe like that's the beacon that we want to get to and swinging the bell overhead with locked out arms. But the starting point is the deadlift, right? Is like, can you do something slow and controlled? Now, can you do it with a little bit more load? Do you have some strength endurance? Okay, now we're going to start doing something a little bit more dynamic, in an EMOM format or something like that. So these are all progressions of the same movement pattern, but we're not going deadlift day 1, max out deadlift day 2, 50 deadlifts for time day 3, and then 10-minute kettlebell swing test on day 4. And that's huge exaggeration, obviously. And I don't think there's any gyms or coaches out there that are programming that, maybe, but I don't know of any. But
sure hope not.
Yeah, right. Then they need to come. First, they probably need to go see a chiro, and then they need to come see you. But the point being is that when you look back at your design, there should be a lot of repeatability of things. But when you zoom far enough out, day 365 is probably going to look very different than day 1. And that's ultimately how you show progression for the client. But the funny part is that if you do this right, when you introduce a new movement to somebody, it should almost be indistinguishable from the one that you're doing. All right. And so if you imagine this 12-month continuum with a whole bunch of movements that somebody can progress through, and now you zoom in and figure out like, where's that transition happening? When you give this new thing to the client, it should almost be like they say, oh, of course, it makes sense that we're going in this order. All right. That's when you know that progression is like spot on. Okay. Now, obviously, we need to figure out in real time when we're working with clients, what are we doing in terms of cues? So the best cues, what are they? What are the best cues? So they come in 3 different varieties: verbal, visual, and tactile. But a funny story that I always like to relate to people is, you're coaching a client and they are just having an absolute terrible time picking up what you are trying to coach them to do. All right. For whatever reason, what you're saying in English, they are receiving in a completely different language. Their eyes are glazed over. They're giving you the confused look. They're throwing their hands up in the air, and there's just something that's not clicking. And then Joe, who's been there for all of 3 months, walks by and says, oh, it's just like a sprinkler. And boom, the client gets it. And it has no relation in your brain to anything that would actually work. All right. But for whatever reason, that cue got the client to do what you were actually wanting them to do. And so what I always tell people, whether they're new coaches or veteran coaches, I don't care what your cues are, because the best cues are the ones that work. All right. Be they verbal, visual, or tactile. So I do want to give you some thoughts in terms of Things to just keep in mind when you are using these particular types of cues. Number one, verbal. Figure out how you are facing. A lot of times, this is particular with new coaches, but I've seen veteran coaches kind of fall victim to it depending upon the size of maybe the group that they're talking to. But pay particular attention to how you're facing, all right? If you turn to write on the whiteboard as you are still talking, all right, all of a sudden the volume of your voice, the carry of your voice changes dramatically. It goes down. And here is this is so embarrassing for me to tell, but it's hysterical and it gets a laugh all the time. So I'm going to tell it. I learned this the most difficult way that you could years ago. I had a client come to me. She wanted me to coach her one-on-one personal training. The thing that was special about this client is that she was deaf. So she could read lips though, very, very well. But I don't know sign language, but Brian, I'm sure you could see where this is going. So we're like 1 or 2 sessions in and I'm talking to her, facing her, and I'm showing her. So I'm using visual cues. I'm showing her what I want her to do. I'm putting her into position tactically by just, easy touches. And then when it comes time to explain the workout, I say, okay, here's what you're going to do. And I turn around and I keep talking as I'm writing on the whiteboard. All right, it's going to be 3 rounds of this, and you're going to do 21 of these and 12 of these. And remember to keep this in mind, what we just talked about. And I turn back around. All right, does that make sense? And she's like, you idiot. I'm deaf. I did not hear anything that you just said. And I'm sure that my face, I don't have anything red right now. Yes, I do. So this is one of my cool coasters. I'm sure my face was this shade of red whenever she called me out. But I have never, ever turned my back on a client or a group of clients that I am coaching since then. That was the greatest learning experience for the power of verbal cues only if you are facing the right way. So make sure that you are facing the right way, and also the fewer words that you can use, the better. So instead of one that I like to explain to my coaches is, instead of if somebody's front squatting and their elbows are way down, like, hey, loosen up the grip and try to drive up with your elbows to the sky and your chest nice and tall and everything. Shorten that up. What do you want them to do? Well, I want their elbows up. Great. Say elbows up, and they'll reorganize themselves. Now, if you need to do more work on it, great. But usually verbal, fewer words as possible. Make sure that you're facing the client. Visual cues. This is where you're going to show what you want done and then ask them to do it. Okay. Or it could be you show them what they are doing, followed by you showing them what you want them to do. So a way that you can do this, depending on if you're coaching in person or remotely, you can use something like Coach's Eye, or there's another app that I've used for years called Huddle. But it gives you the ability to record something and do a voiceover and show them what they're doing. And you can actually put it side by side with you doing it and showing them what you want them to do. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The other way is make sure that you are sharing videos of what good movement looks like. The best case scenario is you are sharing your gym's YouTube channel. All right, so when they go to find content for the best looking kettlebell swing, I don't want them to find my gym. I want them to find Brian's gym. All right, if I'm a client of Brian's, that is the channel that I should be subscribed to. And anytime that you find a client say, oh yeah, I found this video, if it's not one of yours and you haven't filmed it before, as soon as class is over that day, film it and send it to them. Here you go. I just found our video of that same movement, even though you literally just created it. But do that. All right. Let's see. Yes. Subtle plug, Fuel House Gym. Go to their YouTube channel and subscribe. All right. This is obviously very big for remote coaching, but it adds a ton of value for in-person clients as well. And then the last one, I always have to caution people when I talk about tactile cues is be mindful. Some people don't want to be touched. And so make sure that your touch is appropriate. If you're touching somebody for, this sounds so funny to say, but like for the first time, ask them, make sure, hey, I'm going to put my hand on your hip right here. Is that okay? Or, hey, I want to touch the middle of your back. Is that okay? Because it's going to help me coach this movement more effectively for you. Ask them. All right. There's nothing that can go wrong if you ask first. The worst that can happen is they say, no, I'd prefer you didn't. But a lot can go wrong if you don't ask first. All right. So ask. This is not one of those things where you say, oh, well, ask for forgiveness later instead of permission now. No, 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 no. Ask for permission first, not forgiveness later. All right. The value of tactile cues is just the proprioceptive feedback. You can kind of put somebody's body into the position and space that you want them to be in. All right. Another good thing is push them out of positions. So put them into an uncomfortable position just slightly so that they overcorrect into a better position that you want them in. Okay. So in the case of Jeff with his hip shift to the left, maybe I actually push him over to the left a little bit more so that he has to self-correct to the right. And we could do that with a band too. Okay. Or push them into the position that you want and say, okay, you feel this, and you get a verbal, yes, I do. Okay, great. And then let go, and they will go back, presumably, to the position that was kind of their default position, the wrong one, and say, okay, do you feel the difference? Hopefully they say yes. If not, great. Or if not, that's okay. Try something different. But if they do say, yeah, I do feel that. Okay, cool. Let me see you get back into that position on your own. Okay. And kind of take some mental notes. What was it? What did I do? Did I say something? Did I show them something? Because this is just more ammunition that you can use down the road. Okay. So, but just keep in mind that the best cues are going to be the ones that work for, and that might be different for every single client, and that's okay. What I've had coaches do in the past with this is have somebody watch your class that you coach the next time that you coach a class or an individual, and have them draw on a sheet of paper 3 separate columns, and at the top of each column put verbal, visual, and tactile. And then every time that you give a cue, just have them put a little tally mark and tally up what is your, predominant type of cue that you are going to give. And I'm going to make some assumptions because I've been doing this for a while. The smallest column for everybody that I've ever seen evaluated is that tactile column. It is the least used form of cue that I have ever seen, which makes it super, super effective when you do actually use it. Okay. But it'll just give great insight into where are you defaulting? Are you somebody that always gives verbal diarrhea to cue and correct somebody? Do you just show them and you don't really use words at all? Or are you running around and touching everybody? All right. Putting them into the right position using tactile cues. Okay. But if you want to coach movement better, you can't do it without first understanding the basics. All right. You got to know what great movement looks like. So understand the basics of the squat, hinge, push, pull, and core movements. Start to look at not just the stuff that people are doing in the gym, but then also the real world application of these movements. And then after that, you can't go on to program and do it well until you assess your clients. Okay. So after you do that, you write a great design. The next piece is this refinement piece. So this is where you can go in and make these little tweaks. But remember what we said. Number one, design begins where ability ends. And then if you do a really good job on the design, it minimizes the massive amounts of course corrections that coaches sometimes find themselves in because they have just selected things that are way too far beyond their client's current capability. All right. So the way that we always look at this is just our framework of what we call learn, design, deliver, refine. Learn, you're trying to paint that. Maybe Mona Lisa would have been the better choice here, Brian, instead of Picasso. You're trying to paint the Mona Lisa, a very clear picture of the client that's sitting in front of you. Remember, it's not just about what you see, but also what is said in that consultation. Design process is where you are actually writing out what they're going to be doing, in this case for movement. Delivery, how are you delivering it? Is it in person? Is it online? Are you going to show them your YouTube channel, Fuel House Gym? And then finally, the refinement. All right. This is where you are just constantly trying to make these little tweaks to get them 1% better on a long enough time frame. Okay. Any questions, Brian? I will default to you first.
No. I thought I had one earlier on the 3 Ps with the framework, but I forgot it. So.
Did you were you there for that one? I can pull that back
up. Back in April, no. I think I've only been doing these for about 2 months now.
Okay. Yeah. You want me to send that to you?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I can certainly send that to you, man. Yeah, absolutely, man. I can do that. Well, if you think of it, let me know. But it was the prioritized plan and progress was, really the framework there, where we're looking at low hanging fruit. And then we're talking about alignment of, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. This is the plan. And this is why you should care about the plan. And then finally, the progress, the progression for clients is sets, reps, rest, tempo, load, complexity of movement, things like that.
Yeah. Now that I'm because I'm looking more through the my notes, I think it might have had to be, it was in the 3-step checklist part. So it'll come back to me and I'll shoot you an email. I've got your
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. And then if there's anything else, because I know sometimes coaches have, particular questions on, man, how can I coach this movement better? Or here is a common fault that I see. If there's any of that stuff, for sure, let me know. And if I can't make the words correctly, like typing back to you, I'll film a video and send it to you too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But overall, yeah, this was awesome. Very informative and a lot of good, self-assessing things of how I can improve my coaching game. So
good. Yeah. That's really what I want to kind of drive here is I think most coaches know enough to be effective. And so then if that's the case, let me give them a good framework for how to actually just do their craft a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, much
well, cool, man. I appreciate you being with us today. And Sandy did actually say something back. She kind of gave me the laughy face there. So I'm sure that's with regards to the assault bike. But yeah, send me the question when you think of it, and then I'll turn around and once I get that video processed, I'll send it over to you too.
Cool. Much appreciated.
All right, man. Have a great week.
Thanks, Josh. You too.